We're on page 266, 267. We're actually going to start on page 267 today. We're continuing along Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's discussion of a pious person. A pious person is someone who has control over all of his faculties, and that's why Rabbi Yehuda Halevi called the pious person a ruler or a strong governor or leader, because he's able to be in control of all of the different conflicting faculties and forces and personality traits that he possesses. And so he continues and he says, once he provides for the needs of all his faculties, in other words, like we learned the last time, the way that you go on a diet is not to stop eating. You have to, if you want to be able to get yourself under control, you have to be able to feed the different forces and the different urges that exist within a person, but you eat with moderation. You eat food that is lower in calories but is still filling and so forth. And so once he provides for the needs of all his faculties, giving his natural faculties their necessary rest and sleep, and giving his faculties of animation their necessary waking hours and integration with the active world, he's using ancient philosophical terminology for all of the different parts within the human being. There's a part of us that is what we call the natural faculties, which means that the things that I do to be active during the day need to have proper rest. But also, there's a faculty of animation that is only sort of sustained by being exposed to images and experiences and sights and sounds and things like that. And that too, I have to be able to stimulate those faculties within myself that have a desire for seeing and hearing different things in life. And then he can then call upon his community like a highly regarded ruler who calls upon his obedient legion to come to his aid. He can call upon these faculties to attain a level, which is what we call the divine level, which is higher than his current level and higher than the intellectual level. He is able to organize and rectify his community in a way that is similar to how Moshe organized his community around Mount Sinai. And the Mechilta just mentions that Moshe didn't just organize a hodgepodge of Jews of different echelons of society all together, but he said, okay, Aharon and his sons come up to this point, the Zakenim go up to this point, the tribes go up to this point, the Erev Rav goes up to this point. All different levels were assigned different stations around Mount Sinai. And this is just a metaphor, an analogy for how a person knows how to organize the different faculties within himself in order to make sure that he's structured, organized, and disciplined within himself or herself. What I really wanted to demonstrate for you today is that, first of all, the idea of comparing a human being in control of his various faculties, in comparing that to a ruler over a city of citizens and designating what each particular citizen and group of citizens is in charge of and is supposed to do, is not a new idea that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi innovates. The first thing that's important to know is that almost everything that you can find originates in Tanakh in one place or another. And in this instance, the analogy of a human being like a well-fortified city when he is disciplined and in control finds its source in Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs that Shlomo HaMelech wrote. It's in Mishlei Perek Chaf Hei, and this is the handout that I have for you up top. In the last pasuk of the Perek Chaf Hei in Mishlei says, Ir perutza ein choma, that if you have a city that has been breached and it has no wall, is ish asher ein matzar lerucho, so too is a man who does not have any safeguards or protective boundaries around his soul. In other words, a completely undisciplined individual who does not know how to create proper safeguards and proper boundaries in the way that he or she lives their life is like a city that is not protected. It's vulnerable to any different kind of attack. so too is an undisciplined person vulnerable to any kind of attack. It's almost like the opposite of what Rebbe Yehuda Halevi is saying, is that if you have a well-fortified and controlled city that's ruled properly, that's what a pious person is like. The Malbim in his commentary, the Malbim is not an ancient commentary, but he's telling us, he's elaborating upon what Shlomo HaMelech actually means when he says this. He says, if you take a look at the Malbim, Kavar himshil et ha'adam le'ir ketana. We've already, King Solomon had already previously analogized in this way, comparing a person to a small town or a city. Shemelech gadol mesavev ota lekovsha. A city can sometimes be under threat of siege from a foreign ruler who wants to try and conquer the city. V'hu shahayetzer v'hadimyon v'koach hata'avani me'akev lichbosh et kochot hanefesh tachat rishuto. He says the analogy is that many times a person's lusts and desire for indulgence, for self-indulgence, drives a person or causes a person to almost be conquered by those forces, by those lusts. Many times people become controlled by their desires. Do I eat to live or do I live to eat? Right? So a person who is totally under the subjugation of his desires is this type of person who is facing the threat of siege by a foreign ruler, a foreign dominator. V'hayetzer hatov nilcham ba'ad ha'ir ve'ino maniach el tzarei hanefesh lichbosh et ha'ir. And so what is the function of the Yetzer HaTov, the force of good that exists within me? It is to fight for the city and to not allow this foreign tyrant to come and conquer my city. V'hachomah haniskava shabo ya'atzor ba'ad hatzorer hu hama'atzor sheyasim ba'ad haruach. And the wall that is built around the city represents the protective barriers that I have placed around myself to prevent me from succumbing to those drives and those desires. What kind of walls do we build around ourselves in today's world? Can anyone think of an example of a wall that one would put up?
Shabbos.
Shabbos could be a wall against what?
Against excessive involvement in work, living to work instead of living to live.
Good, great example. I was thinking of a much more mundane example. Some people put up internet filters. You know, that's a wall. We put up walls all the time. What are some examples of what other some examples? What? Right. So again, a rabbinic law that protects us against assimilating and mixing with non-Jews in social situations is not drinking their wine, drinking with them. What other kinds of walls? It doesn't have to be a halachic wall. It can be a societal wall. What kind of walls do we place around ourselves? What? No, you're thinking too literally now.
Oh, okay.
What kind of walls do we build to protect ourselves from succumbing to evil? Yes. Dressing sneastic, right? That's right, to prevent ourselves from succumbing and prevent others from succumbing. What else?
Being part of a community.
Being part of a community. How many of you have ever done this? Not allowing ice cream to go into your freezer. Is that a wall?
Yes.
No?
No, that's
Yeah.
pathetic.
What?
That's pathetic.
That's pathetic? Spoken like a true thin person.
What do you mean
Right?
by that?
I think that's true for anything that you buy.
Yeah. What do I mean by it? You create a wall, you create a protection from succumbing to that drive for sweet dairy products.
Individual serving portions of snacks.
There you
Little
go.
bags.
That's a wall. Oh, that's a wall. So you see, we create walls all the time around our city as safeguards from succumbing to temptation, succumbing to doing something wrong. Okay? Putting up a mechitza, yeah, again, that's very literal. That's literally a wall. But again, think about the wall as a metaphor and not literally, not necessarily literally a wall. Okay? So the Malbim continues, And he says, Ki haruach hu hama'aleh hatzirim el halev. He says the spirit within man is what allows a person to imagine things. V'yitzrei ha'adam rubam ra'im. And most of a person's inclinations are mostly evil. In other words, if a person allows his imagination to run wild, the majority of those thoughts are going to lean towards something negative. Tziyurei haga'ava v'hakin'a v'hanekama u'chedomeh. Images of arrogance, of jealousy, of revenge, and the like. In other words, we tend to, unchecked, we tend to gravitate towards negativity. Uve'et yitnasei haruach v'yaleh hatziyurim hara'im el halev. He says, and at a time when a person allows his imagination to run wild, va'az ba ha'oyev el ha'ir. That's when the enemy comes to the city. V'nishka ha'milchama b'toch ha'ir, or v'nashka ha'milchama b'toch ha'ir, and that's when war takes place within the city. Ki az b'kal ki yimashech achar hatzirim ha'ila lif'ol kefi sha'on dakim. He says, because then it'd be very easy for these images in one's mind to fall prey. But he says, but that's the but every human being has the strength to be a ruler who can control the client or the environment that is around him in his city. As another pasuk in Mishlei illustrates, that every person's spirit can eject the foolish person and praise the wise person. So this is the wall that is being described that can prevent the enemy from coming into the city. But if someone doesn't have that wall, has a breached wall, and he allows these images, his imagination to run wild, then the Yetzer Hara will become dominant and the enemies will conquer the city, because there are no walls to prevent them from coming in. So again, the creation of walls is to create safeguards from preventing our imaginations and our desires from running too wild. And there are many ways, I guess, to apply this, but that's the general idea. The converse is what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is talking about, and that is that a disciplined person is a pious person. He's in control of all of his faculties, and he's able to be like a ruler over a city, clearly controlling everything that goes on, and does not allow any foreign oppressor to come into the city. He has total command of his armies. His walls are well fortified. I wanted to also point out that not only is Rabbi Yehuda Halevi not inventing this analogy because we see that it exists in Mishlei, but it is also very much part of the worldview of the philosophical community of his time. In university, I studied a number of different Arabic philosophers that undoubtedly influenced Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. Probably the most famous one, it was Muhammad al-Farabi, who lived in the 9th century. If anyone's ever interested in tracing some of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's philosophical influences, there are many books that discuss these ideas. But al-Farabi is considered to be like the father of Islamic philosophy, and in many ways, many of the Spanish and Middle Eastern medieval Jewish philosophers were very much influenced by these philosophical ideas of al-Farabi. The Rambam wrote, and I've mentioned this to you before, the Rambam wrote something called the Shmona Prakim. He wrote the 8 chapters, which acts as an introduction to Pirkei Avot. And I don't know if any of the ones ever studied Shmona Prakim, but it's basically a treatise on ethics, on how a person refines his character and becomes a refined and controlled human being, a person of integrity. And he writes in the introduction to the Shmona Prakim that what I'm about to write to you, I'm gleaning a number of my ideas of the Shmona Prakim from foreign sources that are not from Jewish sources. But I will not reveal to you my source because, as is known, that within the Jewish community, anytime you try to introduce an idea that does not originate from Jewish texts, the Jewish community tends to reject it and cavalierly dismiss it. And because I know this to be the case of my countrymen, of my people, I will therefore present to you these ideas, but will not provide proper attribution. I will not provide you authorship. Now, who was the Rambam referring to? So, people who study medieval Islamic philosophy see a very clear correlation between what the Rambam writes in the Shmona Prakim and the writings of Muhammad al-Farabi. And Muhammad al-Farabi was not only known for his ethics, but he was also known for his political philosophy. Now, what I mean by political philosophy is that he, in Islam, talks a lot about the perfect state. What kind of governmental system is perfect in nature? This is important to know when trying to understand the modern Islamic mind. The reason why it's important is because in Islamic political philosophy, there is a subscription to Plato and other medieval and ancient ideas of political philosophy, which dictate that democracy is an inferior form of government. Democracy is not desirable. Now, why in the world would democracy be bad? If anything, the Western civilization is based on democracy as a form of government, which basically means that we vote, we all have an equal vote, we all vote in our leaders, and we can remove our leaders if they are not doing a good job. So what's wrong with that model? It seems like an idyllic model. The problem with the model is that if you believe, as Plato did and his followers in the Islamic world, if you believe that there are certain people in society that are enlightened, and the vast majority of people in society are unenlightened, then why would we rely on the popular vote to elect our leaders? Our leaders will only be representative of an unenlightened worldview because the majority of people are unenlightened who vote those leaders in. And so we need not, instead of a democratically elected leader, we need the philosopher king, as Plato calls him. Someone who will rule the people through his enlightened state of being, who will have great wisdom and great connection to the divine. And that was the model for political philosophy for many centuries until the advent of the Enlightenment, and when monarchs started to fall out of favor. Because people saw that as much as there's virtue to a philosopher king ruling the society, it's very rare that such a person will emerge in the practical real world. Okay? But understand that this is al-Farabi's worldview, and it's reflective in many ways of a modern Islamic view. Why do Muslims hate democracy? Not because they love totalitarian governments, but rather because they believe that the world is destined under a caliphate to be ruled by people who are very enlightened and who have great wisdom and will be able to lead the people to true greatness, not like our democratically elected leaders of today. So do you understand the logic behind it? I'm not here to condemn it or to criticize it, but it's important to understand it. Yes, Linda?
It actually does make sense.
Yes.
If it could, like, I mean, Israel had kings, right?
Yes.
Ruling in
That's
Judean.
right.
Okay, but the problem only arises when they're not ethically and morally bound to their
That's the point. And that's why the Torah advocates monarchies and not democracies, because the Torah says that when you reach a certain spiritual greatness, then God will choose who your king is going to be, and through the prophets, and that person will be the great philosopher king, will be the great leader who will bring people to a state of enlightenment. That's why we believe in a Mashiach. A messianic figure is just that person. Right? It's not a democrat. We're not going to democratically elect who's going to be the Messiah. We're not going to put it to a vote. And even, within Jewish communities, there's a tension also. We all acknowledge that there's a tension, right? How many of you feel that a rabbi should be democratically elected to his post? Well, that's the way it is today, right? But in some ways, it's a little bit awkward, right? What if a rabbi is very charismatic and tells people exactly what they want to hear? He's very popular, but does that mean he's the best candidate for the job? As a matter of fact, the Gemara says just the opposite. The Gemara says that any rabbi who has all of his congregation happy with him, then you know that he's doing something wrong, because he's not properly chastising his congregation. There have to be some people who dislike the rabbi because otherwise that's a bad sign. He's just a yes man. He's just trying to be a crowd pleaser. Right? So that's, the tension between democracy and enlightened leadership has always been there, and it still lingers to this day. One could comment on current politics if you wanted to, about whether or not the popular vote is the best way to go as far as selecting our leaders today. You see where it leads us sometimes. But I think that what your point is that in the absence of an enlightened society, this is the best we can do. This is the best we can do. And it's the safest, because it prevents totalitarian regimes that rule for years and years and decades, like we saw in Cuba. Okay, so the reason why I bring this up is because you can see this article. It's just a small portion of a much larger article on Al-Farabi's philosophy of society and religion. That's the name of the article. And in one section of the article, he has something known as the principle of similitude. Now, what the principle of similitude means is that there are patterns that exist within the universe that one can find on multiple levels of existence. The cosmos is the largest pattern, then you have community, and then you have the individual. This is a concept that's found in ancient Greek philosophy, in medieval Islamic and Jewish philosophy, and you also find this in Kabbalah as well. The Kabbalah, and we'll actually see Rabbi Yehuda Halevi make reference to this idea of not only are there similarities between the human being, who's a microcosm of the universe, but there are also correlations not only between the large and small, the macro and the micro, but there's also correlations in time as well. So when we study the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, when we study that together in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi at the end of essay number 4, which is proto-Kabbalah, in other words, it's pre-Zohar Kabbalah, which Rabbi Yehuda Halevi introduces us to, we'll also learn about this idea of the tripartite correlation between Shana, which is time, Olam, which is cosmic space, and Adam, which is the individual human being. Okay? But for now, let's look at a different tripartite system, which is man, society, and cosmos. And what essentially Al-Farabi discusses in his writings on political philosophy is that if you want to see a pattern for the way a society should be structured, look at the cosmos and the stars and their structure, and then you can structure society in some way, trying to abide by a system of using an astronomical model. And if you want to know how a human being should function, take a look at a well-functioning society. See, is that starting to sound a little bit familiar? Does it sound like a little bit like what we're studying now in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi? So let me just bring your attention. If you turn over the paper, essentially, Al-Farabi applies Aristotle's notion of ergon, which is that every being that is created or that exists has a function or purpose, to the cosmos and each of its members. Accordingly, the cosmos as such is not only determined by a certain order, it actually represents the best of all possible structures, as it is the effect of the over-perfect first cause. first cause referring to the divinity. Like we've talked about before, first cause is the philosophical term for God. Consequently, every part of the cosmos possesses a specific function which it must perform in order to keep the perpetuum mobile, cosmos, running smoothly without interruptions and disturbances. While everything also executes its function by nature, humanity, equipped with reason and free will, must choose to do so. That's the difference between the cosmos and the human being. The cosmos functions naturally without having to decide to function that way. The human being has to use his bechira chofshit, his free will, to function correctly. Therefore, it must understand the cosmic order and its own place and duty, or rather ergon, in the frame of this all-embracing structure, which once again underscores the significance attached to knowledge in Al-Farabi's thought. And yet, the implications of the two paradigmatic examples, organisms and the cosmos, reach further, inasmuch as both examples represent complex entities with a diversified internal makeup. To be sure, every element of the cosmos, or an organism in general, contributes to the well-being of the whole. Nonetheless, each has its peculiar activity. The heart, for instance, is in charge of pumping the blood through the blood vessels and thus keeping the body alive, whereas the kidneys are responsible for filtering the blood and regulating water fluid levels. Similarly, Al-Farabi gives to understand that each human being has a particular task within the framework of society in view of her specific skills. You can tell this is written recently because it uses gender. It manipulates gender, alternating between him and her. Okay, and he quotes from The Perfect State, which is a book by Al-Farabi, and it writes as follows: "The excellent city resembles the perfect and healthy body." Now, where did we see this? The excellent city resembles the perfect and healthy body. No, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi merely just reversed that, and he said the healthy body resembles the excellent city, right? All of whose limbs cooperate. Now, the limbs and organs of the body are different, and their natural endowments and faculties are unequal in excellence, there being among them one ruling organ, namely the heart, and organs which are close in rank to that ruling organ. The same holds good in the case of the city. Its parts are different by nature, and their natural dispositions are unequal in excellence. There is in it a man who is the ruler, and there are others whose ranks are close to the ruler, each of them with a disposition and a habit through which he performs an action. And so you can, I mean, a lot of it is very, I don't know how interesting this is to you. I'm not sure. But this is stuff that I would encourage you, if you like. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy has a whole entry on, multiple entries on Al-Farabi, but specifically if you want to look more about Al-Farabi's philosophy of society and religion, you have the link on the paper. You can research it further if you'd like. So anyway, that just was by way of an introduction that the ideas of Rabbi Yehuda Halevi that we encounter, especially in this section, really are his own take on ideas that find their origin in Mishlei, in the Proverbs, and also are circulating during his time in contemporary philosophy as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi very often does this. He will borrow terminology and ideas that are circulating in his time in order to illustrate points that exist in the Torah, as the Rambam does, and as so many other Jewish thinkers throughout the ages have done. This is a consistent pattern. One should not be shocked or surprised by any of this. This is what Jewish writers have been doing for centuries. The only thing that
they don't reference the source.
That's what I was just going to say. The only thing that may raise eyebrows is the lack of attribution. But understand, this whole idea of attribution of sources really is only a recent phenomenon in literature. That it was considered to be unethical if you were plagiarizing an idea without attribution. That up until maybe a couple of centuries ago, there was never such an idea that I have to carefully footnote all my sources. Okay? Because some of these ideas are just ubiquitous and they're circulating, and so it's very hard to properly attribute. It's not only Al-Farabi, it's Plato. And Al-Farabi is based in Plato. Al-Farabi never said this is Platonic. But it's clear that he's quoting Plato. And Plato in turn may be quoting Socrates, or And so there are so many different works that borrow from each other very, very liberally, and the lines are blurred as to what's borrowed and what's innovated by the latest author.
Do they claim that they're original though?
You don't have, no, there's no claim of originality. There's a claim of truth, that this is truth.